Marshall here again. Today I got some really good stuff to share with you. Got a few shout outs to make, a little bit of the history on my personal journey to building these C-4 transmissions for racing. And then I'm going to share with you all the good stuff I do to these things to get them to survive on the racetrack. So stick around, we're going to get to it. Quick side note, there's something I do to these C4s that I've never seen anywhere. Might as well be in the world at this point. I've never seen it talked about. I've never seen it done, but it pertains to the journey that I was talking about of getting these C4s to last. So I'll let you know about that too. All right, quick shout out to Dustin Racing. Great family, and I've known them pretty much my whole life. I'm actually doing this trans brake C4 for little Stevie, and this trans over here is out of Steve's transmission. I've been building his since the early 90s, which really involves part of the journey I'm going to talk about today. But I'd especially like to give a shout out to Steve's dad. And back in the day, I literally bought my car when I was 13 years old, 2 months before my 14th birthday. And it was a 67 Chevelle, primer gray, and the ad said 12-volt posi on it. So I saw that and I said, man, that's a race car, I gotta get it. So brought this car home and had no engine in it. Transmission was in the back seat of the car. But I was determined to get this car going. And Steve had his Mustang, I had my Chevelle, and I owe a lot of gratitude to Steve's dad because he really helped me to get me jump started into this whole hot rod journey I've been through my whole life. But I remember a particular story. He actually found me my first engine, and it was a 400 truck motor from a machine shop. And he found me this engine, which I brought home, and I was building this car out on the street. It wasn't even in a garage. And so I have a picture of the motor right here. This is the original engine I got. 400 truck motor, great motor. I ran that motor for years. And I have a picture one night after I prepped the engine, which actually here's a picture of the engine in the car after we got it installed. But I got a picture I want to show you. I'm going to put the clip in there. But of Steve's dad and Steve, it was dark, so he had probably had a long day of working, being a mechanic, and they were down at my house in the dark. We had flashlights, had an engine crane out on the street, putting this engine in this car. And it was, I mean, this is good memories here. You can't beat this stuff. But, so thank you, Steve's dad. I appreciate it, Big Steve. And I just, a lot of gratitude. I owe you a whole lot for my beginnings in my career. So appreciate it, man. You got to know this family to really appreciate the passion and commitment they put into what they do. And as I build these transmissions, I put all that amount of passion and commitment into what I put into these transmissions to make it happen. All right, quick side note, something I didn't mention in my last video. about whatever it takes in that little C6 that could. We were talking about the evolution of the Overdrive. And one thing I didn't mention in there is Chrysler's actually did it a little different. If you look at this E4OD here, I was saying how they have the direct drive 3-speed here, and they had the overdrive in the front, and they just overdrove the direct drive. But Chrysler's actually used their direct drive 3-speed and just put overdrive on the back of it. Basically doing the same thing, but that's how Chrysler did it, being the black sheep, you know. First of all, I'd like to start by talking about this bench a little bit, actually. It used to be a 4x8 sheet of flat steel, and my dad took it somewhere, I don't even know where it was, and got this thing bent. It's got a trough in the back and the drain, proper transmission bench. But this is my do-it-all bench. I do all my tear downs, do all my building. But after I tear a trans down and I get it cleaned up, I clear the bench and I basically brake clean and wipe this thing down so there's no dirt on it. If there's one thing you do when you rebuild a trans, it's stay clean. And I don't care if you're building a transmission on a dirt floor, which I've done before. You just got to get some clean cardboard and just make sure you're not kicking dirt all over the place. Pretty much that simple, but it's that important. Quick side note. I know this thing I'm going to share that I've never seen before, ever. I kind of had to learn it the hard way. I know there's a lot of racing transmission builders out there that already know this, but I'd rather teach somebody now before they have to go through the agony that I did to learn this lesson. So that's the whole point of showing what I've never seen before. Okay, this actually is a really good transmission to talk about because I have never seen it before. And when he first brought it to me, we tore it down, and everything in this thing was pretty much a bone stock transmission, which I was surprised to see, but it is what it is, with a trans brake valve body on it. So very interesting. But to start with, I want to talk about that thing I've never seen before anywhere out there. Nobody's done it that I've seen before, but it's all about shift timing. And back in the day, Steve came to me when I was first starting to build. Them early 90s were rough for me, people. That little C6 that could, his C4s. I mean, I've learned more building drag racing stuff in high performance and heavy duty than anything I've done on a stock car before. Because you learn how to make things last, how things work, what works, what doesn't, and all that. But this thing I saw, he actually, trying to remember back, it was the early 90s, came to me one day and said his transmission's messing up. And I said, all right, pull it out and let me check it out. It needed to come out. So pulled it out of the car, went through it or tore it down, and saw that this front planet was all wobbled out and bad, creating metal, which was hanging the governor, make it take off in second gear sometimes, flaring, valve body was all hung up because of the metal. And so I rebuilt the trans, did everything I could that I knew at the time, put the old blue plate specials in them, and it worked good. He'd get about a year out of it, and that was drag racing, street driving, I should say. And about a year later, came to me one day and said, man, this thing's hanging up again, something's going on. And sure enough, pull it out of the car, and the front planet was bad again. Now, back in the day, they didn't have the 6 pinion planets that I knew of. But rebuilt the trans, went through it again, did everything that I knew to do. Didn't really know any more then. But so about a year later, same thing. And the third time I was building his trans, he came to me one day with a spring like this in his hand. Looked like a valve spring. And he said, man, I just came back from the speed shop. the guy said, you got to put this in your trans. And I was like, all right, well, that's kind of a weird spring. Where in the heck's that going to go? And at the time, everything was about second gear and direct clutches and all that. I wasn't even thinking down here in the low reverse. But it wouldn't fit. Come over here. It wouldn't fit in the second gear servo. Fits there, but it doesn't fit in the case. So I was like, man, that's not where it goes. So the only other place this spring could go is right here in the low servo. And that goes right in there and it applies the rear band. So I was like, all right, not knowing why, but I put it in the car, put it all together, said, all right, let's try this. And after that, he used to burn this thing up every year. After that, he got like at least 2 out of the car before the transmission started messing up. And I guess once I tore it down, I really figured out what was going on here. And this is good stuff. But if you look at this trans, it's all about shift timing. So basically what was happening is you got your, it takes off in first, you got your low band on, and then when this thing goes to hit second, the band comes on and stops this from turning, and you get a different gear ratio. So you got your front planted in there. But what was happening is this band was not releasing fast enough. So the band was coming on for second, but this was not releasing fast enough. And it was causing a tie up in this gear train, almost like a binding. And it just made sense. So this servo, second gear, when you hit third gear oil pushes that servo off. But the only thing that pushes that servo off in the rear is your spring pressure. You don't have any fluid pressure pushing that off. So I was like, man, that is it. That is the coolest thing I've ever seen. And in the beginning, I was just thinking second gear, third gear, but that shift timing and that tie up was causing that planet to go bad. So he'd get like 2 years, maybe 3, I don't know, after I put that one spring in this trans. So that was pretty cool. That's one of the things that I do that I've never seen before, but it makes all the sense and it works. All right, I want to mention this here too also with this low reverse servo and that pretty neat thing I do with the actual spring. This is a stock spring. It's pretty spongy. And this actually is a valve spring out of an engine. That's how strong it is. But you can see the difference of release pressure of this servo being able to push it off in time before that second gear band comes on with that spring as opposed to that. So if you don't have a spring, a heavy spring, you get an engine valve spring. I think I use the 200 shift kit springs is what I use in these because I do Lisa's trans too. And you know, I couldn't just go to the speed shop, never seen it before, so an engine valve spring will work too. Just can't be the 3/4 cam valve spring like back in the day because that's going to be a little too stiff. All right, back to the teardown on this thing. When I tore it apart, it literally was a stock transmission throughout it. And it just had a trans brake valve body bolted to it, which I was very surprised, but it is what it is. So, tore this thing apart, and this is one of the upgrades that needs to be done on a C4 because the front planet and the direct clutch pack are the most stressed parts in this transmission for racing. So when I tore this thing apart, this is a direct clutch. Not completely burned up, but definitely hot spots. Clutches are dark, but it only has 4 clutches in it. And this is one of the upgrades you do to it. You actually get 6 clutches in it. And these are stock clutches that come out of it. Just stock C4 kit clutches, cost you about $8 for all 4. Now these clutches here, they're the red Alto. This is what I use. They work. And the black choline steels. And this clutch pack survives. Being 6 choline steels, but if you look at it, 6 steels, 6 clutches and 6 steels, 4 steels, 4 clutches, factory performance. But the height difference is the same. That way you can stack up 6 clutches in the direct instead of just having your stock C4. All right, we got the direct clutch there, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that once I get into the shift timing, because it's all about timing. You got the forward clutch. That's pretty simple. We get 5 clutches in there. A stock one has 4. This one actually did have 5, which they have survived. The forward clutch generally isn't a big problem with these things because it's not a shifting clutch. You put it on in drive and it stays on the whole time. Through 2nd gear, through 3rd gear, all the way through your run, they're on. So they generally aren't a problem. You know, heavy duty up. Put the good clutches in there, choline steels, and that clutch generally is happy. And then also, this trans had a stock band in it. Stock band, nothing special. And you can see it's burnt. And this is a performance band. Similar material. A lot of times I'll use Kevlar. This is the red line band, same as the clutches. And that's really all you need to do as far as the band situation. All right, another thing that I do, onto the 2nd gear servo, which is super important. The performance ones, this transmission actually had a stock 8-cylinder servo in it. And this is what come out of it. If you look at this here, it's got an A on it, and that's your stock 8-cylinder servo. Is what it is. Now this is an H servo. I don't have a cover here, but this is what I got in Steve's trans. If you look at that. Now the apply area on this, see the difference in the size there? And it doesn't take a whole lot, but this is a performance servo. It's all about the surface area here. Same pressure, bigger surface here, you get more pressure pushing that band on. So that was one of the issues with the shift timing of it burning the planet out. When you upgrade to a bigger servo, it actually hits harder, and that band didn't have time to come off. But that alone basically keeps that band from burning up. So it used to have the A servo in it, got rid of that. Got the H servo in Steve's trans. Stevie's trans, I could not find any stock servos, and so we had to upgrade to a billet one, this one here. It's got the cover and the servo, and the surface area is actually, look at this again, you got the A servo and the H servo, and this is the equivalent to a C servo. It's the biggest servo that Ford makes, and it's actually a little bit bigger than the H servo. So that's what we went with in this thing. The H servo's been working fine in Steve's trans, no problem. But we went ahead and went to the full-size C servo on Stevie's trans. So, and not only that, so important. This is your 2-3 flare up right here. If you look at this again, you got fluid. Here's the band. You got fluid coming in this little hole, comes out the back, pushes the servo on for 2nd. For 3rd gear, this is all about shift timing. This, on the back of this piston, is where your 3rd gear oil comes in. So not only is it applying the clutch, but that third gear oil is hitting the back of this servo. So if you have a little tiny servo or apply area for second here, when that third gear oil starts coming in, it's easier to push off. So what happens on that flare is the band is coming off too fast and the direct clutch is not applying fast enough. So that's where you get that engine rev up and it slips into third, which basically helps burn up your direct clutch. So when you got a big apply area, it's harder to push off and the shift timing gets corrected. And that's one of the reasons, and it basically corrects a 2-3 shift flare. So that takes care of second gear and third gear. Good stuff. All right, back to the the main two weak links in this transmission are basically the direct clutch, which we talked about, and then there's this planet, the one I've been waiting for 2.5 months for. Finally got it, here it is. And if you look at this planet, this stock planet, and it's going bad. This is the one I pulled out of the car. This pinion is really tight right here. It's not real loose yet, but that pinion barely turns. It's real tight. But that's your stock 3-pinion planet. This is the 6-pinion planet. So where they machine this out, they get rid of the gears in the center. There's your holes there. They machine it, drill holes, do all this work to it, and they get 6 pinions in it. And it actually, if you look at it close, it's got little bearings on the bottom. With that gear being angled right there, when this thing has a load on it, it's forcing these gears into the back of this carrier. And that's the purpose of these bearings, which I've never seen that before. This is a new company I'm using because the other company I used to use told me it was going to be 6 months to get the planet. So this is a really nice piece. Took them forever, cost way too much money. They actually told me they were going to give me a discount on this stuff. Got 2 input shafts, the planet, and I'm putting a hub in this thing too, but I figured if we're doing it, we're doing it. And it is what it is. They overpriced it, but that's racing parts, I guess. So we got the front planet. Now this front hub here, this kind of complements the front planet. The stock one, this is another one. The stock one has a thrust washer here. And then you got your hub. Thrust washer rides against that. What they do is they machine this down. If you look at it close, they just machine this down to where they can get a bearing in there. Right there, that's where they machined it. So now it doesn't have a metal making thrust washer. It actually has a thrust bearing instead of a washer. You can see the difference there. So that's pretty cool. And that wasn't too expensive. So we needed to get that done too. So that kind of complemented the front planet situation. Good stuff. All right, on to the input shafts. These input shafts here, this is a stock shaft and this is a racing shaft. And if you look at this shaft right here, it's got a little twist to it. Those are the input splines that spline into the converter. And this actually was in Steve's trans. Right there, goes right there. And he actually upgraded to a 351 in the past couple years, and he's always run a stock shaft and never broke it. But I got to thinking, I looked at it the other day because I have this trans here, and I looking at those splines and saw that they were a little twisted. So I told him, you know, if there's anything gonna break, it's gonna be this shaft at this point. So he's gonna upgrade to the new shaft as well as Stevie's trans. But you can see the difference in these shafts. It's they look kind of identical, but stock shaft, performance shaft. So we're putting performance shaft in this one and in the trans brake C-4. But one note I would like to talk about, I actually bought a shaft from the big box store company, and is a reputable company that I've been using. for the 6-pinion planets for these things. They told me it would be 6 months to get one, so I had to go to a different company. But I ordered one of these shafts and it came in. This goes back to building basics. Every part you get in, you have to check close, because this shaft I got in, and I'm gonna link up pictures and you can see it, but the shaft they sent me was actually 5 thousandths too small. So basically, when you put the shaft in there, it was rocking in the brand new bushings. Couldn't believe it. As much money as it is. And then the actual machining of it was super rough. Just like they used old tooling and just kind of cut it out. And we all know where that came from. But anyway, had to send that back. And I finally got these good shafts. And so we're upgrading that too. All right, another things with these shafts that I forgot to mention was if you look at these close, you can see how much shinier this one is compared to that one. And building transmissions, it's all about using the 5 senses, and you can actually feel this better, almost better than you can look at it. But all I do, brand new shaft, just take some 600 sandpaper. It's got to be 600, can't be anything rougher than that. And just sand the shaft and make it smoother than when you received it. Very important, because all this stuff can wear your bushings out faster if it's not at least 600 or better. I've even used 1200 sandpaper sometimes, but 600 works perfect. So, you get it? All right, going on to the valve body here. This was a sight to see when I pulled this thing apart, but if you look at it here, it's got a trans brake solenoid. And I'm gonna post some pictures of when I tore this thing down, and I actually had to make this. The original had the solenoid, had this piece going into here, and there was JB weld all around this. Crazy. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. And then this piece was screwed into there, just like that. And all there was this little wire. So that's in there. And this little wire piece right here holding that in. And this thing was flopping around, JB welded, nothing holding it down. It's like, man, what is going on here? So I had to figure out something better. So all goes back to doing whatever it takes. So I made this little plate. Now this hole was not here. This hole I can use. This hole was not here, so I had to drill this out and tap it. But what I did was I made this is the first one, that didn't work out. Right there. I didn't have it far enough, and you can see that can't really get the bolt in if it's all the way up against it, but it is what it is. I made another one, made this plate, drilled my holes in the plate, or drilled the holes. This one was already there, marked my hole, and I drilled and tapped that so I could get this plate nice and tight to the valve body. And then took my tapped the hole in it, because I had this almost done and then realized it wouldn't work. So I made another one, did the same thing there. If you look at this close, I put a chamfer on this valve body right here. And the reason for that is I was able to get an O-ring on this thing so it would seal tight. And then I actually, once I got this threaded down in there, I put 2 tack welds on it, and that ain't going nowhere. And then I went ahead and just put fittings out to where I could get it to work. And there it is. That was my fix for it, as opposed to how it came in the shop. Now these are just the little differences that make a trans last, go a whole season, which is my total intention when I build these transmissions, I want them to get an entire year out of the season without so much as a drip on the ground. Doesn't always work out that way, but that's my intention when I build these things. So it's got to be right. So you can see this thing was built back in '07. Old Dwight. I don't know if Dwight's still building. I don't know if you're still building, man, but come on, dude. Okay. All right, another thing I do with these valve bodies, and when you're building a racing transmission, everything's got to be right and tight. I mean, every transmission is important, but when it comes to racing, if it's not right, it's going to go bad. So if you look at this valve body here, you see how flat it is. I've already worked on this. See how flat this is, and there's no low spots or high spots in this thing. Now this thing has no valve body gaskets in it, so this is all the more important. Usually the transmission has a valve body gasket that seals this two together. This one does not have the valve body gaskets, so it's all that much more important for this thing to be flat. So I just basically take my valve body, and all this is my piece of marble. If you ever get a piece of marble, you got to make sure you put a straight edge on it and check underneath, make sure it's not warped. This one's good and flat. I've been using it for many years. Get your sandpaper, 320 for that, little oil, and just flat sand it. Works great. That way you know everything is flat and you're not getting cross leaks all over the place. Another thing about this valve body, this is an original, this is aftermarket. That piece is aftermarket. This is the original valve body. This is an early valve body. And you can see what they've done to turn it into a trans brake valve body. But normally all these little channels here that are cut out, they're not there. But that's all in the name of making fluid go to different places, and it's a manual valve body. It doesn't shift automatically, so this will never be used again in a regular transmission. It's specific to this valve body, and I'm not even sure what company made this trans brake, but it should work out fine. Just one of the difference between a regular valve body and a manual valve body, and the importance of flatness. All right, the one thing I don't like about trans brake valve body, or trans brake transmissions in general, as opposed to a regular foot brake transmission, is the way the pressure system works in these things. And on a trans brake valve body, or transmission I should say, anytime the car is running, this thing is running at max pressure. And I guess the reason they do it is they got to find a way to get into the case, and they run their electric where the modulator goes. If you look at this trans here, see the modulator down here? This is a modulated pressure transmission. So basically it's running about 70 pounds at idle, and then the more you hit the gas, the less vacuum you have, the more pressure you get. So you get pressure rise when you're idling through the pits. Anytime things idling, whatever, it's in lower pressure, so it's not wearing the pump out. But these things run at full pressure anytime the car's running. So you can imagine, this is one of the reasons you have to go through this type of transmission every year, because you can almost guarantee yourself that the pump's gonna be wore out. But there's no way around it. So that's another note about the trans brake C-4. Not a huge fan of that, but that's racing. All right, in my opinion, races are won and lost right here at the bench. It's all about a quality rebuild, quality parts. The transmission is only as good as the parts you put in it, and the transmission is only as good as the person at the bench building it. So anybody out there that are getting theirs built, go to a reputable shop. You got to spend the money, or you're going to get stock stuff put in your trans brake C4. Pretty amazing, but it happens. So another way I look at this is, now you know a little history on my journey through keeping a C4 alive, and They seem to do pretty good at this point for what I do with them. But kind of the way I look at it is life is a journey. You know, unless you're on the racetrack, then it's game on, quarter mile at a time. Another thing is, you know, it's a sickness with us gearheads, us racers, whatever you want to call it. But, you know, you do all this work and you get them right and tight and everything's perfect. And then you just go beat the hell out of them a quarter mile at a time. So, but that's what we do, right? All right, another thing that I actually forgot to mention, it goes on that evolution of the Overdrive and talked about the Chrysler and the way they do things. I actually built a 63 Mercury Comet for a guy, Eric Edelman, cool dude, and built this car for him. And he took it, it just had a C-4 in it. And he brought it back to me about 2 years later. And he said, man, this thing needs overdrive. And this pertains to the whole gas mileage, engine wear out thing. But I ended up pulling the trans out of the car and I put a gear vendor's overdrive in it, which was really cool job. A lot of work, had to cut the floorboards out of it, do all that. But the way the gear vendors is set up, you have your C4 here, 3-speed in the front, and then the gear vendor's overdrive goes on the back. So it's almost actually identical to the Chrysler Overdrive section they put on these things. But after I did that, that car worked great. Highway mileage, it was awesome. So just another note. All right, that's about all I have for the C4, the stuff I do to them, proper things, wrong things. They seem to last, seems to work for me. Steve has trusted me over all these years to build his transmissions, and I'm happy to do it. And you know, the way I look at it, if you're not learning, you're not living. So stay safe out there, be safe in your drag race cars, and thanks for watching, appreciate it, hope you learned something, and we'll talk to you real soon.